So, is technology ruining your life? That's quite a blunt question. Another way of phrasing that question might be, is technology having a negative impact on you or your friends or your family? It's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, both for myself, as I'm a psychologist and I spend a disproportionate amount of time thinking about it, but also just day to day. Why do we ask ourselves that question? Well, technology is disruptive. It changes the way we do things. It changes how other people do things. And psychologically, that can make us feel quite uncomfortable because everything's changing around us and we like to know where we are. And at the same time, if you think about the technologies that you've all got in your pocket, like your smartphones or your tablets, your use of social media, how much choice do you have? If you don't use these technologies, you get carried away. Other people use them and then you're left out, so you're kind of dragged along regardless. So what effect is this having? Well, actually, this is not a new question. Historically, this has always been asked. And if you think about from a historical perspective, let's go back to the 1800s and the telephone. When the telephone was invented, the first thing people said, bearing in mind most people at that time had never seen any kind of gadget like this, they said, why on earth would I need this? Which is exactly what my dad said about the internet. Why would we need this? It was viewed as a toy, as a gimmick. It was viewed that it might make people mentally ill or cause them to go deaf. Telegraph companies were concerned, so tried to spread rumors to put it out of business. People were also worried about their calls being tapped. So some things have never changed because we're still worried about that with Facebook. Fast forward a bit, the microwave oven. Many people still believe microwave ovens can give you cancer. They can't give you cancer. In fact, the World Health Organization looked at about 30,000 peer-reviewed papers over the last 10 years and found that there's no evidence to say that signals from your smartphone or electric power lines or your microwave can give you cancer. But it's still there. If you Google microwaves cancer, tons of stuff. Not suggesting you go out and do that. And then if we fast forward, video games. Video games cause violence. The vast majority of scientists would argue that video games do not cause violence. In fact, if you look at violent crime statistics based on when video games first appeared, violent crimes come down. So based on that crazy logic, we should actually get people to play more violent video games. And that would start. Again, I'm not suggesting that that's what we do to combat violent crime. So where are we today? What's the biggest concern about technology ruining our life? Well, today it's very much about social media and your smartphone and the amount of time that you spend on those devices. Now, it's not just me that has that concern or you. The UK government is currently conducting a rather expensive public inquiry about this, regarding the effects of screen time and social media on young people. So it's a big issue. And indeed, there are studies out there that have asked people, as I could do now, how much time do you spend on Facebook? And then I could ask you about your mood. And then I could put those two numbers together and I might find positive relationships, i.e. the happier you are, the more you use social media, or the other way around. So this seems legit, there's something going on, but is it legit? And it's a big but. How have we got to that point? Well, remarkably, the way we've got to that point is simply, as I've just done there, I've asked you about your social media use. And that's problematic. It's problematic, first of all, because correlation does not equal causation. So, for example, I could feel depressed and go on social media because I'm feeling low, or I could look at social media and go, look how wonderful all my friends' lives are, and that makes me feel depressed. We don't know the direction. It also removes the whole context. There's a big difference between you going on Facebook and having a conversation with your friend and going on Facebook and, again, looking at how wonderful everyone else's life is. It also ignores the fact that you might not be very aware of what you're doing. And in our research, for example, we've asked people, how many times do you think you check your smartphone a day? And they'll say about 40 times a day. And then we put an application on their phone that tells us they're not checking their phone 40 times a day. They're checking their phone about 100 times a day. Now, that doesn't mean it's a problem. You might use your phone a lot, but it doesn't necessarily equate to problem usage. But the point is, it's very, very difficult for you to actually access that information in memory. I can ask you about it, but it doesn't mean you're going to remember, and that's what a lot of current evidence is based on. So what do we do to answer this question if we were going to go down another route? How could we understand the effects of screen time? And what we've done in our lab is we have started to just do that. We've started to measure behavior rather than just ask you. And one of the things that we conclude from this is that yes, you do use your smartphones habitually. You do use technology habitually. That seems to be by and large what happens. You also regulate that usage. If you check your phone 80 times today, you'll probably check it 80 times tomorrow. You'll probably check it 80 times a week tomorrow. That seems to be consistent. But one of the things we're finding is that that behavior doesn't necessarily match up to these kind of surveys and questionnaires that a lot of other researchers have asked. So for example, questions such as, I become anxious when I'm not with my smartphone, it does not necessarily map onto how often you use your smartphones. This might be measuring a very, very different thing. Now, while we're trying to do that, the government inquiry is carrying on. And we've, like many academics, we have given our evidence to suggest that there is a lot more work to be done. But many, many other people have pushed in and said, this is a problem. This is a big societal problem. And I would argue that if you want to say screen time is a problem, the biggest threat it probably poses at the moment is that it's time that could be used somewhere else. So you may use your phone a lot, and one of the biggest threats we have in our current developed world is a lack of physical activity. So you can try it if you want, but if you try to use your smartphone when you're trying to play football, it's very difficult. So you have to separate those things. But just think about this for a second, and think about the historical examples. It's the same if you were reading a book, you couldn't play football. It's the same if you did other activities. People spend a lot of time doing lots of things. People spend too much time working, they can spend too much time doing exercise, they can spend too much time shopping. Smartphone usage or social media usage is potentially another one of these behaviors. But the case isn't made yet that it's actually ruining your life. It's a big part of your life. So in terms of answering this question, as I've kind of hinted at, it would require tracking this kind of usage over a long term. So for example, we intend in the future to look at people's screen time usage from lots of different devices, and then perhaps link that with other long-term outcomes. So for example, does a student's smartphone and social media use actually predict their academic performance at the end of the year? What might the answers from some of this research be? Well, like many get-out clauses from a scientist, it will show good and bad things. There are many good things that technology allows us to do. And as psychologists, for example, we know that social interaction is a positive thing. Now, I don't think that the majority of people are addicted to their smartphone. But one thing we are addicted to is social interaction. And while it is very difficult to predict what technologies will become successful, it's often ones that involve some type of social interaction, which is why we use our smartphones and social media to such a degree. Yes, they do open us to abuse. They open to trolling, they open to bullying. But so did the telephone. So did the telephone many years ago. And we wouldn't think twice. I've realized that many people in this room may never use a landline telephone, but they do still exist. But, you know, they opened the door to the same thing. It's really important that my message to you really is to try and remain curious about a lot of this stuff. It's far easier to get a press release picked up that uses words like addiction and technology and problematic phone use than it is to get a press release picked up that says, we use our technology a lot and that's quite interesting. And trust me, I've tried it. No one wants to cover that story because it's not very interesting. So my message to you is remain curious, think critically, and try and think about how have they come to this answer? How is this really an addictive behavior? Because certain people within public commentators have argued that social media addiction is as potentially addictive as cocaine or drug use. And I mean, that sounds on the face of it unbelievably incorrect, but that's often what then filters down rather than the science that's going on behind the scenes. The reason that it's really important to get that balance right is if we do become too negative, and we do believe that all this stuff is having such a negative impact on our lives, we run the risk of stifling the very innovations that we can all think about off the top of our heads that have transformed our lives for the better, and will continue to do so. Thank you.